Number 10. Avoiding discomfort reflexively. You don't even notice when it happens. The moment something feels slightly uncomfortable, a difficult conversation, a challenging task, a moment of boredom, your mind reaches for escape. You check your phone. You postpone the task. You change the subject. You tell yourself, I'll do it later. It feels harmless, small, normal, but this reflex is silently rewiring you. Discomfort is not an enemy signal. It is a growth signal. It is the nervous system stretching beyond familiarity. When you reflexively escape it, you teach your brain a dangerous lesson. Discomfort equals threat. Over time, your tolerance window shrinks. Things that once felt manageable now feel overwhelming. Hard conversations feel heavier. Focus feels shorter. Effort feels exhausting before it even begins. You start believing life has become harder, when in reality, your capacity has quietly reduced. The human brain adapts to whatever pattern you repeat. If you repeatedly choose relief over resistance, your stress threshold lowers. Your psychological muscles weaken from lack of load. Imagine going to the gym and dropping the weight every time it feels heavy. You wouldn't grow stronger. You'd grow hesitant. Eventually, even lightweight would feel intimidating. That is what happens when you reflexively avoid discomfort. You become sensitive to friction. You begin negotiating with yourself over minor effort. You seek smoother paths, softer edges, shorter routes, and slowly, without any dramatic collapse, your psychological strength begins to decay. The most dangerous part? It feels like self-care. But real strength is built in moments where you stay, just a few seconds longer, inside the discomfort instead of escaping it. And if you never stay, you never grow. Number 9. Treating stress as danger. Your body cannot tell the difference between a lion and an email notification. When your heart rate rises before a presentation, when your palms sweat before a decision, when your chest tightens under responsibility, your brain interprets it as threat, and most people immediately try to eliminate the feeling. Calm down, avoid it, escape it. But here's the hidden cost. Stress is not proof that something is wrong. It is proof that something matters. It is activation, energy mobilizing for performance. The same physiological response that prepares you to survive also prepares you to grow. Yet modern comfort culture teaches you to treat stress as pathology. The moment you feel tension, you assume damage, you assume burnout, you assume danger. So you step back, you reduce exposure, you shrink your commitments, you design a life optimized for low pressure, and your system adapts accordingly. When you repeatedly interpret stress as harmful, your brain strengthens the association between activation and fear. Future challenges trigger stronger avoidance. Your tolerance narrows, your confidence erodes. What was once excitement becomes anxiety. What was once challenge becomes threat. Psychological strength is not the absence of stress. It is the ability to reinterpret it, to say, this sensation means I am expanding, to let your heart race and still move forward. If every spike of stress makes you retreat, your nervous system becomes fragile. It overreacts to normal pressure. Small demands feel like emergencies, and you slowly become someone who must live in carefully controlled conditions just to feel okay. Stress is not your enemy. The belief that it is, that is the real danger. Number 8. Removing friction from life. Everything in your life is becoming smoother. One-click purchases, instant entertainment, food delivered before hunger fully registers, conversations reduced to emojis, navigation systems that think for you, algorithms that decide what you see, hear, and believe. Convenience feels like progress, but friction is not a flaw in life. It is a feature. Friction forces decision. It forces patience. It forces effort. When you remove it completely, you remove the small resistances that sharpen awareness and discipline. Think about waiting in a line. Years ago, you stood there with your thoughts. You observed people, you reflected, you practiced stillness without realizing it. Now, the second boredom appears, you anesthetize it with stimulation. Micro moments of friction used to train endurance. Now they are eliminated before they can strengthen you. Psychological resilience is built in these small resistances: the delayed reward, the extra step, the mild inconvenience. Each one is a repetition in the gym of adulthood. But modern systems are designed to reduce friction to zero. And when life becomes frictionless, your tolerance for inconvenience collapses. A slow internet connection feels infuriating. A minor delay feels offensive. A difficult process feels unacceptable. You expect smoothness everywhere, and when reality resists, you feel destabilized. The problem isn't technology, it's adaptation. Your brain adapts to the level of resistance you experience daily. When resistance disappears, your internal strength recalibrates downward. Then, when unavoidable friction arrives, illness, conflict, loss, failure, it feels catastrophic instead of manageable. Friction was never the enemy. It was the training ground. And if your life becomes too smooth, your mind becomes too soft to survive the rough. Number 7. Escaping effort whenever possible. You don't hate hard work. You just avoid it in subtle ways. You look for shortcuts. You search for hacks. You consume productivity content instead of doing the task itself. You optimize before you execute. You research endlessly so you don't have to begin. It feels intelligent, but it's often avoidance dressed as strategy. Effort is uncomfortable because it exposes uncertainty. When you try, you risk discovering your limits. When you apply yourself fully, you remove excuses. Effort demands commitment, and commitment removes the safety net of, I could have done better if I tried. So you unconsciously preserve that safety net. You delay starting. You switch tasks mid-process. You convince yourself conditions aren't ideal yet. You wait for clarity, motivation, inspiration. But psychological strength is built in sustained effort, not in perfect conditions. Every time you escape effort, you train your brain to seek the easier route. Neural pathways strengthen around avoidance. Discipline weakens not dramatically, but incrementally. You begin to feel tired before you've even worked, drained before you've committed, overwhelmed by projects that require persistence, and slowly, effort itself starts to feel abnormal. The danger isn't laziness, it's preference. When your default preference becomes minimal exertion, your capacity shrinks to match it. Hard things feel harder because you rarely practice doing them. Effort is a psychological stressor that expands identity. It proves to you that you can sustain pressure without collapsing. If you constantly escape it, you never collect that evidence. And without evidence of capability, confidence quietly dissolves. The strongest minds are not the most talented. They are the ones who remain when the work becomes heavy. If you always exit at the first sign of strain, you don't fail loudly. You weaken quietly. Number 6. Overprotecting emotional energy. Somewhere along the way, you were told to protect your energy. Avoid negativity. Cut off draining people. Don't engage in what disturbs your peace. At first, this sounds wise. Boundaries are healthy. Emotional awareness matters. But something quiet begins to happen when protection turns into insulation. You start filtering your world too aggressively. You decline difficult conversations because they feel heavy. You avoid relationships that require patience. You withdraw from responsibilities that emotionally stretch you. You curate your environment to minimize disturbance. And slowly, your tolerance for emotional strain decreases. Emotional energy is not a fragile resource that depletes permanently. It is a capacity that expands through use. When you repeatedly expose yourself to meaningful emotional challenges, conflict, vulnerability, accountability, your system adapts. You become steadier, more grounded. But when you treat every emotional discomfort as a threat to your peace, you reduce your exposure to growth. You become selective to the point of fragility. Minor criticism feels overwhelming. Disagreement feels like attack. Honest feedback feels exhausting. You interpret intensity as toxicity instead of training. Real resilience means being able to stay present in emotionally charged moments without collapsing or escaping. It means carrying tension without immediately needing relief. If you constantly shield yourself from anything that disturbs your equilibrium becomes dependent on perfect conditions. And perfect conditions do not exist. Strength is not found in silence and safety alone. It is found in your ability to enter emotional storms without losing your center. Protecting your energy is important, but overprotecting it may be slowly shrinking you. Number 5. Avoiding situations that test identity. You say you know who you are, but when was the last time that identity was challenged? Most people build a version of themselves inside safe environments, competent among friends, confident in familiar rooms, intelligent within topics they already understand. Identity feels stable until it's tested. Situations that threaten identity are uncomfortable. A debate where you might be wrong, a room where you are not the most skilled, a role where you are no longer the expert, feedback that contradicts your self-image. So you avoid those arenas. You stay where your strengths are validated. You speak where you feel certain. You perform where the outcome is predictable. It feels strategic, but it's containment. Psychological strength grows when identity is exposed to friction, when you discover gaps, when you realize you don't know as much as you thought, when you feel inadequate, and remain present anyway. If you constantly avoid situations that test you, your identity becomes rigid. It cannot expand because it is never stretched. Over time, this rigidity becomes fragility. You begin defending your self-image instead of developing it. You interpret disagreement as disrespect. You avoid opportunities that could refine you because they threaten your current narrative. True confidence is flexible. It can survive being wrong. It can survive temporary incompetence. It can survive exposure. But if you never allow yourself to be tested, you build confidence on unverified assumptions, and untested identity feels strong until reality confronts it. The strongest minds willingly enter rooms where they are not the best. If you only stand where you are safe, you never discover who you could become. Number 4. Choosing comfort over capability. Comfort is seductive because it never argues with you. It tells you to rest instead of train, to relax instead of prepare, to stay where things feel predictable instead of stepping into uncertainty. And most of the time, it sounds reasonable. After all, haven't you earned it? But capability is built in moments. Comfort tries to interrupt every time you choose the easier option. Not because it's wise, but because it feels better. You make a quiet trade. Immediate ease in exchange for long-term strength. Softness now for limitation later. Comfort does not demand growth. Capability does. When you repeatedly choose what feels good instead of what builds skill, your competence plateaus. You stay familiar instead of formidable. You become someone who functions well under ideal conditions, but struggles when variables change, and life always changes. Capability is what allows you to adapt, solve, endure, and recover. It requires deliberate exposure to challenge. It requires repetition when motivation fades. It requires doing the thing even when you would rather not. Comfort whispers, "You can skip it this time." Capability replies, "This is the time that matters." The danger is not occasional rest. Rest is necessary. The danger is when comfort becomes your primary decision maker, when ease becomes the filter through which you evaluate opportunities, when the first question is no longer, "Will this grow me?" but "Will this strain me?" A life optimized for comfort slowly loses its edge. You may not notice it immediately. You still function, you still cope, but your range narrows. Your adaptability weakens, your tolerance shrinks, and one day when real difficulty arrives, you realize you built a comfortable life, not a capable one. Strength is rarely comfortable, but capability is what protects you when comfort disappears. Number 3. Letting resilience decay quietly. Resilience rarely collapses in a dramatic moment. It fades, not through catastrophe, but through gradual softness. There was a time when you handled more pressure, more uncertainty, more responsibility. You absorbed setbacks and moved forward without overthinking every emotion. Now, small disruptions linger longer. A minor criticism stays in your head all day. A slight failure feels heavier than it should. A delay in progress drains motivation more quickly. You recover, but slower. This is how resilience decays. Not loudly, not visibly, but subtly, through underuse. Resilience is a psychological muscle built through exposure and recovery. When you encounter difficulty and move through it, your system recalibrates. You prove to yourself that discomfort is survivable. But when you start designing your life to minimize strain, that proof becomes rare. You avoid heavy conversations. You reduce ambitious goals. You protect yourself from potential disappointment. You shrink commitments to reduce stress. It feels like balance, but underneath, your recovery capacity weakens. You become more reactive to what once felt manageable. Your tolerance for ambiguity narrows. Your emotional bandwidth shortens. You need longer periods of calm to feel stable again. The most dangerous part is that nothing looks broken. You're still functioning, still productive, still socially engaged, but internally, your resilience threshold is lowering. And because decay is gradual, you adapt to the weaker version of yourself without noticing the shift, until one day, something hits harder than expected, and you realize you're not as steady as you used to be. Resilience must be exercised. If it isn't challenged, it doesn't stay. It softens, quietly. Number 2. Confusing ease with well-being. You feel calm, but are you strong? There's a difference. Ease feels like well-being because nothing is pressing against you, no deadlines stretching you, no conflicts sharpening you, no uncertainty forcing decisions. Life feels manageable, smooth, quiet. So you assume you're healthy. But well-being is not the absence of pressure. It is the capacity to function under it. When life is easy, your nervous system stays unchallenged. Your thoughts remain untested. Your emotions are not forced into regulation because nothing disrupts them. And this can create a false sense of stability. You begin to equate low stimulation with mental health. You design routines that avoid intensity. You interpret calmness as proof that you're thriving. But calmness without capacity is fragile. True well-being includes adaptability. It includes the ability to experience stress without spiraling, to experience discomfort without shutting down, to experience chaos without losing direction. If you only feel okay when everything is controlled, you are not well. You are insulated. Ease can mask stagnation. When you rarely face friction, you don't practice emotional regulation. When you avoid complexity, you don't strengthen cognitive flexibility. When you minimize strain, you don't build endurance. Then difficulty arrives, as it inevitably does, and your system reacts as if something is deeply wrong, because it hasn't trained for pressure. Well-being is not just feeling good, it is functioning well. And functioning well requires exposure to what stretches you. If your life feels easy all the time, ask yourself, are you healthy or are you simply untested? Number 1. Becoming fragile without noticing. Fragility does not announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a breakdown. It doesn't send a warning notification. Tea doesn't feel dramatic. It feels normal. You slowly adjust your life to avoid strain. You reduce exposure to difficulty. You protect yourself from stress, friction, effort, and emotional weight. Each decision seems reasonable, but strength is not something you keep automatically. It must be exercised. When you stop exposing yourself to resistance, your tolerance shrinks. When you stop carrying pressure, your capacity lowers. When you stop confronting discomfort, your threshold narrows. And the dangerous part is that the world around you adapts to make avoidance easier. Technology cushions effort. Culture validates withdrawal. Language reframes retreat as self-preservation. You feel justified. So fragility doesn't feel like weakness. It feels like balance, until something unavoidable happens. Loss, conflict, responsibility, uncertainty, and suddenly your system reacts intensely, overwhelmed, anxious, defensive, exhausted. Not because the event is extraordinary, but because your resilience has quietly atrophied. Fragility is not about emotional sensitivity, it's about reduced tolerance. It's the gap between what you can handle and what life will inevitably demand. If that gap widens slowly over time, you don't notice the shift. You simply become someone who needs more control, more certainty, more comfort just to feel stable. And that is the silent cost. Strength is not permanent. It is maintained through friction, effort, stress, identity testing, and emotional exposure. Without those, it fades quietly. The real danger isn't that life is getting harder, it's that you might be getting softer, without realizing it.